Welcome back to Mindful Masculinity. I'm Richard D'Ambrosio, and today's episode was born out of a really thoughtful discussion that I had with tonight's guest, Jason Granger, and I'll introduce him in a few minutes. I had written an essay called For the Love of Men, and in that essay, I wrote about Jimmy Kimmel and a 22-minute monologue where he honored his best friend and band leader who had died suddenly from a long-term disease. And Kimmel was grieving that night publicly because his friend had just died that morning, and he celebrated this decades long male friendship, which is so unusual for so many men. This personal and loving relationship. He also honored Cleto Escobedo II's as a father who had given up his career for his son, who became Jimmy Kimmel's friend. To me, it was emotionally intelligent, and it was an example of a masculinity that I aspire for. Granger and I had a back and forth about what Jimmy Kimmel did. We discussed what masculinity looks like to each one of us and how much emotions can play a part in what we think a masculine man is. How do masculine men react in emotional situations and in adversity? And the reason why I wanted to speak to Granger is that because not only did we have this wonderful back and forth where we challenged each other and we expressed ourselves openly, but even despite the fact that we see the world in some ways differently, we also have a common ground that we can build off of. And that to me is what makes conversations rich. So I wanted to speak with Granger a little bit more tonight to understand what exactly does a healthy, contented man look like in 2026, especially in how he handles and expresses his feelings. So, first, an introduction. Granger holds a BS in psychology, and he's currently earning his master's in clinical mental health counseling. He is currently nationally certified in nutrition, wellness, and professional life coaching. He's an active men's ministry leader and pastoral counselor with more than 6 years of experience, and he's currently seeing clients in both faith-based and clinical settings. The most recent news about Jason is that in October of last year, he published his first book, What is a Man, Jason?
Yeah, it's my second book.
It's his second
That's
book.
okay.
Okay.
That's okay. That's all right.
He's a lot more prolific in authoring books than I am. He's got two on me. Granger, welcome to Mindful Masculinity. Thank you so much for taking me up on this opportunity for us to go into this concept of how do two guys who come from different backgrounds, we write differently about men, how do we see both differences and commonality in this expression of emotions? Now, I have read a lot of your Substack. In fact, I just read the piece that you had sent me the other day, The Forgotten Half, where you looked at Richard Reeves, who's coming up in my next Substack. So thank you for doing that hard work for me. And I followed you on Notes, and I know you care deeply about men's flourishing. So I wanted to ask you, somehow the algorithm put my Substack essay in front of you. When you initially read it, how did it land? What were the feelings that you were feeling as you kind of heard me talk about role models and this one particular role model, this guy, Jimmy Kimmel, who did this 22-minute monologue? What were you seeing in my essay and thinking about?
Well, so it's funny that part of the answer to the question is part of what I wanted to start with was in saying that it's got to be at least acknowledged and considered like awesome and beautiful that two men can just get on here that disagreed about something. And I think we could probably both agree in saying that that's something we disagree on is very minimal compared to the things that people can be disagreeing about. But
Right.
two people end up, they say, hey, this is how I see it. Well, no, this is how I see it. And next thing you know, one of a few things can happen. What ends up happening here is we end up on a podcast.
Right.
So, like, that right there, if we did nothing else, but just get on here and say, hey, let's talk, and that's it. We've done more than a lot of people I think are willing to do. They're like,
Right.
well, I don't agree with you, so I can't even be in the same zip code. What are you talking about? That's the exact guy that you need to be talking to, is the one that you don't
Yes.
agree with.
And we
Because you
don't do
don't
enough of that in this country
exactly,
today. We do
exactly.
not talk to people who come from different perspectives.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You don't really learn from the people that agree with you that much. You do some, but not nearly as much as you learn from the people that
yeah,
don't agree with you. That's where you really start learning things. So
absolutely.
to answer your question, I'll be honest with you. I kind of misunderstood you, to be fair, at the beginning.
Hmm.
Because my initial, so to answer your question, that gut reaction, that initial thing for me was I was more so looking at the comments towards Galloway, Reeves, and Peterson. Now, I tend to be a little bit of a Peterson apologist. I don't mean to be. I don't. It's not like I'm proud. It's not like that. I just. Um, he was the guy that kind of woke me up a little bit
Right.
to a lot of what's going on, and so and I understand him. I feel like I understand him as well as I understand anybody.
Hmm.
And he's a very complex individual. But like I said
Very.
in our exchange, that sometimes he's so abstract you can't get there.
Yeah.
I wish Galloway wasn't so crass. He talks like he's in a locker room 100% of the time. It's like
Yeah.
he can't get in and out of the locker room. And then, of course, on my piece on Reeves, I sort of don't agree with his prescriptions. I agree with his diagnosis, but not his prescription. So
Right.
there's a piece of me that was like, yeah, I kind of get it, but golly, at least somebody's saying it. It's like
Yeah.
there needs to be, as you have pointed out, there just needs to be more guys like you and I that are saying, hey, there is something real happening. This is not we're not making this up. We're not trying to win back the 1950s male. That's not what we're doing.
Right.
This is really a genuine problem that somebody's got to say something about and at least be willing to say something about it that so many have been afraid to for obvious reasons. People lose their jobs over things like this.
Because I know that you feel that, and you specifically stated that a man has to navigate adversity, maybe even the loss of somebody close to them, or to make decisions that bear deep emotions. Men have to tread very carefully with those because I thought what I heard you say was very often in those sort of not dire situations, but certainly serious situations, men have to push those emotions down in order to make those kinds of decisions. Walk me through that a little bit more, both as a person who practices clinically. Where did you come to that conclusion that emotions can be an inhibitor from making smart decisions as a man?
The best thing I can tell you about how we sort of process those. Now, if we really want to get into it, and I don't know that we have time for this one, but there's a lot of research on empathy and how it can cloud your judgment. Now, depending on what empathy we're talking about, because I
Right?
believe there's a difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Where cognitive, you got, oh boy, I'm about to go down a road you didn't ask for. But anyway, that's
Go
where I
down the
got,
roads.
well,
Nobody's telling you which road to drive on,
that's
Jason.
I know. That's where I get some of my, we've got to be careful about our emotions because they'll cloud us.
Right.
They'll cloud our judgment. The research on that is pretty simple. We did a placebo study where they did half the group and half the group, and they told the same story. And the story was about this little girl who needed a surgery, needed like a transplant surgery or something, and they said that basically they said told one group when you're listening to the story, listen to all of the emotion of it and just let your feelings happen there and feel everything they're saying. And the other group they said don't feel anything, just listen only to the facts. And on the group that they said now here's what you can do. Now you both have the option to move this girl up the line. She's down the line a ways in the donor list of this surgery, this procedure. But if you do, the people that she moves in front of are going to die. And there's like five people in front of her. This is not exact, but this is the
Right. No,
gist
I
of what the
understand.
study was. On the side that read the facts, they kept her right where she was at, and the side that said to be in tune with their feelings all moved her all the way up and killed all five of the
Right.
people that were in front of her. They were willing to watch a bunch of people die to see the person they were empathizing with succeed, even if that meant
Hmm.
it didn't matter how many people had to die in the process. So emotional empathy can cloud good judgment. Now, we still need it at times. There's still times for it. Obviously, in my profession, you really need it. Cognitive empathy is really important, and sympathy and compassion are all super important, and we all need it. We just have to be aware of it. It's just like water. Water can be a wonderful thing, or you can drown in it. Like you know, it can go either direction. And so that's one of those
Yeah.
things. That's where I got the sense from. But I'll tell you, Richard, if you give me a second, I've got two quick stories to tell. One of them I invented, a scenario I invented, and funny story, I invent a scenario, I tell it for I don't know how long, and all of a sudden a client walks into my office and tells me this exact story
Same
right back to
story.
me. And I'm like, so I wasn't that far off. I've met a guy who is this story I've been telling. And then the other story is actually a personal story, but the first one is that can give you an idea of what we're talking about is so this we got this man who is on his way home from work to see his wife and kids. While he's on his way home from work, he gets a call from his mom who says, "Hey, Dad's not well, stage 4 cancer diagnosis." Hits him like a ton of bricks. He gets home, he walks in the door. His wife says, "Hey, I made your favorite meal because I know you've been having a hard day and a hard week." And he goes, "Hang on, honey. I can't do that right now. I'll be right back." And he goes outside, he goes out to the garage, he grabs a wrench and he starts torquing and working on a lawnmower that he's never going to use because he's already bought a new one. Okay. That guy is going to process emotion through action. And then there's another one that you could tell for honor. For instance, Brett Favre, when his dad passed away, he decided to play football that night, threw for like 5 touchdowns and 300 yards. Like it was,
Yeah.
we tend to honors a big piece of our grief. So this
Yep.
guy does this, and while he's at this lawnmower, it's like, well, okay, well, wait a minute. One, he's never going to use it, so it's not about the lawnmower. It's about the action. And he starts working on this action because what he's and I say he, this is just a lot of men that I see. This is the scenario. He's over here trying to find language for what's going on. It doesn't
Yeah.
just come to him, right? So he's doing all this like kind of pissed off actually, because that's a real quick one for a lot of men when grief hits,
Anger, it replaces grief when you
right?
lose
It comes
somebody. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Comes right in. And so this guy's finding language for this for two reasons. One, he's just trying to wrap his head around it. And two, he knows he's got to go give an explanation as to why his favorite meal is cold.
Right.
And so he's got to come in back into the wife and go, okay, this is what just happened. And he's got to process this. This is just an example of how a lot of men process emotion. They just don't, it's not something that just comes kind of natural. They got to figure it out. And then the other story that give you an idea about it is it's me and my daughter. I'm at dinner with my my wife. My ex-wife calls me and says, "Hey, our daughter just left your house and she was around the corner and flipped the car into a ditch. You can get there quicker than I can. Can you?" I said, "I'm out the door." Boom, took off out the door. I get there. The car is upside down and it hit the ditch so hard that it was in literally two pieces. The car.
Oh, gracious.
I get there, I see it. I haven't talked to my daughter yet. I've just got this message from my ex-wife. I get there, I look up. She's walking down the road with my neighbor. I'm thinking, okay, well, she's walking. I get there, I look at her, make sure we don't have any kind of like shock. So make sure, because you go into shock and you don't know you're hurt. So I'm checking her for all that. I'm like, is everything okay? And then she tells a joke. My daughter's a absolute one of the funniest people I know. She tells a joke, and I go, my daughter's fine. Like, she's fine. Well, she looks at me though. She still looks at me like, "Are you mad?" She still gives me the "Are you mad?" look. Yeah, and and that was kind of my reaction. I thought, well, wait a minute. I looked over at the car when she said that, and I go, I got insurance for that. Like, I ain't worried about that. Well, I can't replace you, right? And so I took care of everything, got her sent back to the house. She was literally in walking distance from the house, from our house. Took care of getting the car towed, took care of the business. She ends up going home with her mom that night. I go to lay down for my that evening, and my routine is always lay down and I read a book. I lay down, I grab the book, and I'm telling you, Richard, the words on the page were doing this. I couldn't I couldn't read a word still. And so I went, you know what? I put the book down. I said, I'm just going to lay here for a second. And all of a sudden, now I'm thinking about all the things I got to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day and every. So now the thoughts are going like that. Like they're just going crazy. So I looked at my wife. I said, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go outside and walk around for a second. Maybe that helps. I'll be right back. I get outside and I start walking around. That's where it hits me, right? So the full emotion of the thing hits me while I'm walking around. Of course, like an idiot, I come back inside and I go to her bedroom. That was a smart move. And I go and I sit down on her bed, and then I let the
You lost it.
emotions out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, so even talking about it now, it gets me a little bit. See, this is what happens. So
Absolutely,
anyway,
it does. We're humans. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I come back in. I'm good. I come back in. I take care of that, and then so the whole thing hits me, and I tell this story to my brother, who is my brother's a firefighter, former Air Force, probably the machoest of the machos you can imagine. Super built, super big dude. Fought in the Iraq War, and I'm telling him this story, and he just looks at me with this blank look on his face, and I go, "What?" He goes, "I've never even heard of that before." I said, "You've never heard of what?" He said, "I've never heard of the idea that you could process the emotion in the same day, in the
Wow.
same event." He said, "Me and my guys, we deal with this stuff all the time naturally in firefighting and in military. And stuff. You've seen a lot more than the average person's seen." And he sees it on a daily basis. And he said, "Man, I we just go through our things. We go through all the really realistically trauma, actual trauma, and we go through it, and then it just builds, and then we take it to a therapist and dump it on them. And if we even get to that place," he goes, "and a lot of the
Right.
guys don't get that far. They end up just taking care of themselves, often themselves,
Right.
from the stress of it and from from all of it." And and it just hit me. I was just sitting there going, "Holy cow!" Like there are men out here that don't understand that that's the probably the right way to do it. And I'm not saying it was right because I did it. I'm saying after I did it, I realized that was relatively healthy. It was healthy, and there was two pieces to it. So the two pieces to that was the first piece was I set that emotion aside and I took care of business. The last thing I need if my house is on fire is a man running in with a firefighter suit going, "Your house is on fire." I don't need that. I need the
No.
man to come in and go, "You're going to live because I'm here. Let's go."
Right.
I need that man, if my house is on fire. And so in that moment, I had to set any emotions I had aside to be the man the moment demands, which is a book by Jason Wilson, a great book, Be the Man the Moment Demands. And I did that. The second piece is the piece that a lot of the guys I see don't get to. I see the blue collar middle class dudes, as a lot of guys I see, a lot of the men, they never get to that second piece. Go back. Find that delayed emotion that you talked about. Find that delayed emotion and then deal with it right there.
Yeah.
If you don't, it will hurt you. And so I have a tendency to be what I call emotional homeostasis guy. That range of emotion and or the range of who the guy is. So the guy needs to be the strongest person at your father's funeral, Jordan Peterson always says. You need to be the strong man. You need to be that guy, but you also need to be the guy that's okay to be nurturing, gentle, caring, and if that's what that moment demands.
So let me ask you. So, here's Jimmy Kimmel. He's got a lifetime friend who was his band leader. The two of them shared so many life experiences together. Jimmy learned a lot about how to be a man from his best friend. So here he is. He loses him in the morning, comes to work, sits down with his team, and says, "The person who leads the band every night is dead. We're going to honor him by doing the show tonight. And it may get emotional, and I may obviously express that very clearly. As a therapist, how did you see Kimmel's the way he conducted himself? Was that healthy? Because I don't think he was always weepy. In fact, he joked a lot. He talked about Cleto's mom, who was in the audience, in a very affectionate way. Um, just give me your overall summary as someone you would want your children to look at and say, that's a role model of men. How did he perform?
In what you're specifically talking about, yeah, I think it was not only healthy, I think it's necessary. I think it's beyond just calling it healthy. I don't even think that's a good enough word. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because he did exactly what you said. He went through the range of emotions. So he processed it through honor. So we talk about men process grief through action and honor. So he took the action and he honored him. He literally did both of those things that we just talked about in that monologue. And then the other piece was he was willing to go, "Hey, look, I know that I'm a very wealthy, successful man, grown man, but I'm going to be okay with crying in front of millions of people right now.
I
You know,
thought that was the coolest thing. Yeah.
it really was. It was, oh, he was okay with it. Now, I'm one of those guys that I can't stand it when I get teary eyed. I just hate it but I'll tell you
Most of us
why.
men do.
I know. I tell you why. It's because and when I was talking to some guys about this not too long ago, I said something about it, and they said the same thing. It was like because I feel out of control.
Yeah.
You feel out of control. Everything's good until the emotion rises and it's like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, I'm getting out of
Yep.
control and I need to be in control. Anyway, so for Kimmel, yeah, I thought it was super healthy. I thought, yes, that is exactly how you process grief, and it's how you process
Yeah.
and process it now. Because there's another thing about grief. I tell people all the time, if you don't grieve now, you're going to grieve later when society won't understand why you're grieving then.
Right.
All of society understands why you're grieving right now, right
Right.
down to your bereavement pay. It comes within a range of somebody dying, right?
Yeah.
A year and a half down the road, hey, I need bereavement pay. My uncle died a year and a half ago. Like that's not going to fly. And I
Get a
don't and I
wash.
don't and I'm not really trying to go purely economic here. I just mean that that's a good example of if you don't grieve now, you're going to grieve later at some point, and
Yep.
it's going to come at the worst time possible. Right now is the best time to let that out, and he did that night.
Yeah. Now, you and I both agree that defining what men are going through today in society is important because hopefully that focuses people on thinking about solutions. Um, like you, I look at policy solutions like what Richard Reeves is proposing, and I say some of those might work. I'm not an expert. I've read some of the research that he's based his policy ideas on. I'm willing to do experiments. I'm willing, if we do these things objective. But I'm also wondering, do we over focus on the suffering stories and don't spend enough time telling the stories like what you've just told today about how you went through a traumatic experience? Perhaps your daughter might not have walked away from that accident, and you took care of things while your adrenaline was up. But then when everything started to dissipate and you were alone, you allowed yourself to feel the horror, to feel I guess there might have been relief that she was alive, but also the prospect that she may never have come back to that bedroom you were sitting in. All of those things were bundling inside of you. How do we get more of those stories out? Or do you think they're not necessary, that we be telling these stories that perhaps help people understand the full range of male behaviors and emotions?
Well, this is definitely a place that you and I like we're in 1,000% agreement. Is that no, that we have to have more of that. And I think the answer to your question, if I was to just trim it, would be that it comes down to the source. Who is it coming from that's going to deliver that message? For instance, my problem, and I'll go ahead and get here is, my problem with Kim was I just didn't see him representing most men. That's just me. But if somebody like, I'm trying to think of somebody that we would all know. There's an Instagram guy I follow named Adam Allred, and he can be a little divisive at times about some things, but he's a very masculine guy, right? He's got chiseled jaw, and he sits around a campfire with a bunch of dudes and just talks about dude stuff. If that dude did what Kimmel did, it would have a different take. It'd be like, whoa, do you see that guy? So I think it comes from the source. I think the answer is we need more guys that are viewed as uber masculine, being willing to go, by the way, it's okay to go into your daughter's room and cry it out.
Yeah.
And when that guy says it, it's believable. It's like, oh, okay, well, if he can do it, certainly I can. I just got off work all day, plumbing and digging ditches and doing what I've been doing all day, and my daughter almost died today. I think I can go cry it out tonight. Like that guy needs somebody that looks like him. I hate to say it like that, but that's, you know what I mean. Like,
No, I totally agree. And that's why I describe this series of stories as a bell curve, because I think the person you're describing probably sits more towards the hate to even use the word masculine because I don't even know what that means anymore today, but in the traditional sense, blue collar worker, somebody with a job that probably is predominantly occupied by males, firemen, construction, whatever. Um, he needs to see people like him because he's probably not going to listen to. I just wrote about Ron Levant. The funny thing is if you read Ron Levant, the doctor who came up with this concept of, men suppressing their emotions can create distance between him identifying and seeing his emotions and feeling them in a strong enough visceral human way. Um, he had a fascinating life. He was a playboy. Oh my God, the number of women that he slept with, the drugs that he did. He was, the way that he worked on his body and became a boxer to protect himself in school. This guy was macho, but he was also this really brilliant, intellect. And he kind of encompassed so many aspects of masculinity, but most men would not listen to him and his stories because now he's this nerdy professor. And
Mm.
I think to your point, letting men have the permission to tell their stories wherever they sit on that bell curve. That to me is what's so critical because some people are going to listen to Ron Levant and go, wow, I associate with him. You listen to Jimmy Kimmel and you said, I don't associate with him. So now I need to find somebody who you can connect with
Right.
because we all need the very same common ground. It
Right.
is okay to feel emotions in a visceral fashion because if you don't process it now, it's going to come bite you in the ass 20 years later.
So true. It's so true. And one other piece to that is I'm trying to remember if I wrote a piece on this or if it was just a comment. I think it was a piece I wrote that I talked about if we have to be careful, and I say we, when I'm dealing with in couples therapy, for instance, I have to instruct the ladies to be careful because they almost all walk in going, "I wish he'd cry more." And I go, okay, number one, don't disagree. He
Right.
probably does need to cry more. Number two, though, what we really need to be careful with is number one is the first piece is when he's crying, because that goes back to what we were talking about. Put the emotion aside, deal with the issue, then come back to it, cry it out. When he's crying is important. But number two, what you really want to make sure you understand is most men cry when they're overwhelmed. That's the most common like instigator. Whereas women cry when they're happy, when they're sad, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, when they're upset, when they're excited, when they're like they cry over everything. Every type of emotion elicits a tear. Well, men don't. Most men, and I say most men don't operate like that. Most men are going to get overwhelmed. Now, it might be overwhelmed by something great like the birth of a baby. It could be a good overwhelming, but it's either way, it's going to be overwhelming.
Threshold is further down deep inside us. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I do mention that sometimes when we're having that conversation about the emotions and like you said, if I end up if I've got a guy sitting in my office that is just, and this happens particularly with this younger generation, when I've got a 16, 18, 22-year old in my office, male, I usually we're really talking about, hey, it might be time to go get your driver's license. Like we're talking about things like that, where
Mhm.
I don't know if you were like me, and by the way, I'm 50, so give you range, but I wanted to get my license
I
the
got
day I
I got
turned.
11 years on you.
Yeah, you do. But I wanted to get my license the day I turned 16. Like the day I went. On my birthday,
Yeah.
I went and got my license. You weren't
Yep.
letting me get one more day without being able to get in the car and take off. And it's just not that's not what we're seeing in 16, 18, and 22-year-olds today.
My father and mother owned a lumber yard in Suffolk County, Long Island. When 14 years old, you had to work as a boy. You had to work in the lumber yard. There were seven boys and two girls. And at one point, we had a truck that broke down about, a 20-minute drive away. And the guy who was fixing the truck was able to get back to the yard. So now we had to drive back to go get the truck, which meant we were going to have two vehicles back where the truck was broken down. It was a flatbed truck, and we also had a box van. So my foreman looks at me. I'm 15 years old. I don't even have a learner's permit yet. He goes, "Do you think you can get the box van back without getting into an accident?" I'd been driving a forklift for like a year and a half at that point. Every now and then I would jump in the flatbed trucks, because I had learned how to use a clutch, and I would back the truck into the warehouse or pull it up, put a load on it with the forklift. I was confident as hell. And I did. I drove the box van back, and he was driving behind me, keeping an eye on me.
Yes,
But
sir.
when I talk to boys and I talk to men, I tell them, was I a little bit scared? Yeah. The last thing I needed to do was get into an accident because it would have screwed my dad over with his insurance. He would have been screwed. What the hell is a 15-year-old with no learner's permit, let alone a license, driving one of your vehicles? So there was a lot of pressure on me, but I also felt like that was an initiation into manhood for me because I successfully got this vehicle back without a scratch, without running anybody over. And I just feel like, telling boys and men, try to live a life as a young person where, I don't want you to make risky decisions that could put your life at risk or someone else's life at risk. But understand that sometimes you are going to be called to go do things. And that's going to be a moment where you're going to find out just who you are. So I wanted my driver's license as soon as possible because I wanted to start delivering stuff for dad. I'm like, no, I want to be legal doing all this stuff. And my mom literally had me there at the driver's test on my birthday because I desperately wanted it. And it did, Jason. It felt like when the guy said you passed, I stood
Yeah.
taller. My
Yeah.
spine was straighter. I
Yes.
was like, I'm a
You've
man.
accomplished something. You've accomplished something. Serotonin,
So
dopamine, it's flying through the brain at that moment.
so let's talk about your essay, The Forgotten Half. How can you describe why you decided to review his book and what you were trying to accomplish with that essay?
Well, I loved the the book for the most part. I think it was one of those books where I'm reading it going, oh yeah, as I go down through it. And then I hit a chapter and I went, oh no. And then I stayed there for a little while. I was like, no, no,
Do you
no,
remember which
no.
chapter it was?
I can't remember the number, but it was basically when he really started talking about policy. That was when that
Right.
was whatever chapter that is, was when it shifted. And obviously, I've seen a lot of interviews of his. I've listened to a lot of what he has to say,
Yep.
I've also heard a lot of criticisms from other people and tried to listen to what they say and kind of like you said, listen. I'm trying to listen and sort of go, okay, well, is there any merit to these criticisms? And so I'm learning this sort of nuanced version of Richard Reeves because of all this. And I still think, even at the end of the SS, I said this guy needs to be looked at as a revolutionary. He needs to be looked at as a pioneer in what he's doing. I think because he's
Mhm.
doing hard work about a subject that nobody wants to talk about. Um, and I think the first big thing he says that's brilliant is the whole zero sum game thing that he says in every interview, and that this doesn't have to be a zero sum game. We're not
Yeah.
asking you to move the spotlight from here to here. We're just asking
Right.
you to broaden the spotlight so that both genders are covered.
Right.
Um, I should
I
say both sexes. So.
totally agree with you on that. And the first time I heard Richard Reeves speak, he was on Ezra Klein's podcast. And there was a point where they were talking about, well, how can we help men? And they were talking about what you've talked about. Boys are doing more poorly in school. They're deciding less to go to college. And so Reeves was talking about, well, back in the 70s, we came up with Title IX and it encouraged more colleges to help women go to college and it create spaces where they could flourish. And Ezra Klein initially reacted negatively, and Richard Reeves kind of stuttered and stammered. He's like, well, why are you treating boys differently than we treated girls? That makes no sense to me. And it really struck me how too often people do see the zero sum game. They immediately say, oh no, we can't help boys and men. They're still too privileged. And when you look at the statistics that people like Scott Galloway, spit out so easily, there's some privilege to being a man, but then looking at men and going, well, then if we're so privileged, why do we commit suicide at 4 times the rate of women?
Mm,
Why is
mm.
it male income is growing so slowly? I mean, we all know why. We've taken away too many of the good paying jobs. And Richard Reeves is right to point at all these things and say, we need to have serious discussions about, to some degree, the lack of privilege that a lot of men have today. And boy, does that get some people angry when you talk like that. Holy cow. It's
Yeah,
like,
it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago, and I won't say where she was, but my wife was somewhere with a group of women, a group of ladies that were friends of hers and whatnot, and they're standing around, and somebody was in there. I don't remember. This was a larger group, so it could have been one of a bunch of ladies. And somebody made a statement, and she's heard me talk about the things that I talk about and write the things I write about, and she's listened. Um, and somebody said something, and whatever it was that the lady said, it was literally like, "Oh, he's okay. He'll be fine. Men are okay. Men don't need that." And it was a very like anti-male statement that my wife did not see coming. She was
right.
just kind of like, it hit her like, "Whoa." She goes, "Whoa." She goes, "This," and by the way, for context, I'm in the Bible Belt just outside of Nashville, Tennessee.
Right.
So it just that's an area where you don't expect to hear something like that. And when she said it, she just kind of went, even here, this is a statement that just it smacked her in the face. And she came home and she told me about it. And I said, honey, I've been telling you, this is absolutely prevalent in culture, in any culture. It doesn't have to be, say, far out west where we would expect something like that. It's prevalent everywhere. It's I've got a brother that's raising four boys right now,
Uh-huh.
and I think the ranges, I'm going to get this wrong and he's going to get on to me, but I think the ranges are like it's like 7 to 16. I think that's right. Let's
Okay.
hope. I'll owe him a beer if I didn't get that right. But he's raising four boys age 7 to 16. So there's your range of four boys, and he has a pretty good like sort of outlook on that, exactly what you just said, because I heard him say it one day, and I thought, let me just see how he's going to handle this situation. It was a situation where one of the boys was crying, and we got to talking about it later, and he said, what I do is I tell my boys there are things that we need to cry about, and there are things that we do not need to cry about. And when there's things that need to cry about, I expect you to cry, right? But if it's something that we do not need to cry about, we need to figure out why we're crying and fix that. Okay. So there's this again, so here I am, emotional homeostasis. I'm like, yes, I got it. I like the yin and the yang. I like the balance. I don't know that the prescription is just cry all the time or just cry
No,
every time something happens.
no.
Oh, that happened, you cried, good. It's like, no, not just because he's crying doesn't mean it's good. Just like he never cries is also not good. Historically speaking, that space was not available.
No.
It just
Nope.
wasn't available. So anyway, back to Reeves. And again to just wrap up that what we were talking about there was when his prescriptions, it's where I took a turn was when he got to the prescriptions. When he got to what he believed were solutions, some of the solutions, for me, it was like as long as the solution was placed, as far as boys, was placed into the hands of the parents, I was all in. For instance, let's hold boys back a year from girls. Let's have them start school 1 year later than you would the girl of the same age or whatever. I think that's a brilliant idea. I actually know someone who did that. The boy is now 10 years old, and he's
Yep.
perfectly in line socially with his peers, perfectly. And educationally, socially and educationally, perfectly in line with his peers. Boys and girls, they're all, and it was like, well, there's evidence that that was a good idea. So when the solution was in the hands of the parents, I was on board. When he started going into, for instance, he wanted to incentivize through policy more male teachers. My wife is a school teacher, by the way, and so I'm friends with all her school teacher friends, and I ran that by them. I said, "What do you think about this? What do you think about them incentivizing through policy, advocating more male teachers?" I firmly believe we do need more male teachers in schools. I think the last statistic was somewhere around 23% and declining.
Yep.
No question, we need more men in the school system, more male teachers. I just don't know that like making a policy is the solution, because then for me it starts to feel like Thomas Sowell's criticism of affirmative action. We don't have to go down that road, but the point was, hey, if I don't know that I actually need this help. I could
Right.
do this on my own merit. And then we start subsidizing these issues rather than allowing the human being to make the decision to do the issues. It's like, did they come in for even then if you do write policy, did he join that become a teacher for the right reasons? Now you
Right.
start to wonder about that, or is he the most
Unintended
qualified?
consequences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is he the most qualified? We don't
I,
know because
I've
we just
read
subsidized it.
I've read a little bit of the research that the American Institute for Boys and Men has done on this topic, and I'll actually be including some stuff that I found out. Funny enough, I picked the state of Kentucky as the sort of practical example of what's happening today with gendered teachers in elementary and middle school, and some things that Kentucky has tried to do. And what, to your point, a little just a few minutes ago, is that there are other things that not prohibit, but impede men from making the choice to become school teachers. And policies aren't necessarily going to change that. Human nature has to change. For example, one of the things that a lot of men say that they'll go to high schools, they'll teach at high schools, but they won't go to middle school and elementary school because they're worried about being accused of being a pedophile. They're worried
I
about,
have I
I'm
have
in a
read that.
classroom and here I am, a child is breaking down, and I've got to be really careful about being a sensitive male who supports them. I wrote about this in one of my Substacks. I used to teach religious education for 13-year-olds in my Catholic parish back in Orange County, New York. And one morning, I taught on Wednesday nights. I get an email from one of the moms of one of my kids. I think I had 24, 26 kids in my class. And she said, "Hey, Rich, just want to let you know, um, my daughter, who I knew very well because I owned a coffee shop in town, I saw everybody. I was a big part of the parish. I was a big part of the Parks and Recreation Department. Um, she's coming tonight, but she just found out this morning that a baby that she babysat for between certain hours so that mom and dad could get home from work passed away from SIDS.
Mm.
And she's really broken up about it." And so that night, I changed my lesson. I had a lesson that night. I had to totally change it because I wanted to speak to her directly without speaking to her directly. And I talked about
Mm.
how sometimes unfortunate things happen. It's a part of life. And I know at 13 years old, it may be hard to understand that, but that's just the way the world works. And working through your grief is important because if you, like you said earlier, if you just tamp it down, it's going to come back at some point. So we get through the class, and now I've got to recess the kids back to the gymnasium so moms and dads can pick them up. And I looked over at her and I made eye contact with her and I said, "Are you okay?" And she started to cry. And I walked over to her and I said, "Is it okay? Is it okay if I hug you?" And she said, "Yes, it's okay." We stood there in the classroom with nobody else around. Everybody else is heading to the gymnasium. And here's a 50-something-year-old man hugging a 13-year-old girl. I broke the rules because she needed me to break the rules.
Right,
And
right.
once we got a good cry out between the two of us, I said to her, "Who do you have to talk about this?" And she said, "My mom." I said, "Great." I said, "You got to talk about it because if you're
Mm.
feeling something horrible, you got to get it out."
Yeah,
She didn't mention her dad, and I can understand why. He just wasn't
yeah,
that kind of guy.
yeah.
But here's a man telling her, "You're safe with me. I'm not trying to touch you in an inappropriate way. And I'm a model of men who say, I see your pain and I'm here for you." That's so hard, Jason,
That's a
for a
real
man
thing.
to do.
Yeah.
Again, women have the privilege in those jobs to be that kind of supportive role model, that comfort zone in a crazy
Mm.
life. Men don't have that privilege. And I wish women could understand. We do. We have to tamp things down. We have to stop being a certain type of man that you say you want us to be,
Right, right.
and and
Yeah.
and understand the
That
conundrum where we live.
that thing you just mentioned is so real, and here's what frustrates me is that I forget that until guys like you bring it up. I get frustrated with myself. I'm like, that's right. There is this thing, and because I don't see it much, but I know it's prevalent. I know it is. It's just something I don't happen to see. It's
Oh,
not.
big time.
And I actually did, having said that, I actually did have a thing happen to me in the grocery store a couple months ago, and I did write a little Substack note about it. And I thought, let's see what other people say. And I'm in the grocery store, and this little girl, probably two, cute little girl, just turns around, looks at me, sees me, smiles from ear to ear, and just waves at me. Just this big, beautiful smile. And I'm by myself, and I'm walking the grocery store, and I see her, and I've got a decision to make. Now I'm a girl
Right.
dad for the most part. I raised daughters. So this is like right down my wheelhouse. I'm like, ah, it's a little girl. I love this, you know. She turns around, she waves at me, she's smiling, and it's like, are you gonna wave back? You know,
Right.
it's that kind of wave. She wants reciprocity here. I've got a decision to make. Do I wave back and risk that mom seeing me do that and then call me all the names? Or
Right.
do I just walk by and let that girl down?
Right.
That's my option. Right in that, I got a split second to make this decision in a grocery store.
Yeah.
And obviously, and I even said it in the note that I have a decent reputation in the community, so I'm not fearful of something like that. But your average man may not
Yeah.
have that same feeling, right? They may not
Right.
feel confident like I felt confident. And I went ahead and did, and smiled and waved and grinned back and gave her a thumbs up and just kept going on my way. I didn't get weird and stop. Um, but I thought that the exact thing you just said. I thought that, and I said the point of the Substack note was that's sad that I have to stop and think about that.
Yeah.
Why can't that just be a natural reaction to go, wow, this cute little 2-year-old girl's waving at me. I should wave back because that's the nice thing to
Right.
do.
Richard Reeves can build all the policies he wants. Those obstacles also need to be changed. And that's not going to be by policy. That's going to be human, person to person contact, having discussions like you and I are having,
Hmm.
and saying, I'll vet you. I can't let a pedophile in my school,
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
but I also can't penalize you just because you're a man. Yeah. But if we don't change those cultural aspects, I think
Right.
Reeves is leaving out a big part of the equation.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
I firmly agree with that. I think, and the last piece of that I thought about that you were talking about is also those mentors. It's those guy to guy, those dude to dude, those man to man to go, look,
Yeah.
this is okay. This is okay. It's okay that you express your emotions. It's okay, but as long as you don't go here, and I'm going to mentor you, and I'm going to show you what this looks like.
Right.
And anybody gives you a hard time, you send them to me. Like, and I tell people, I said, you are at your safest when you're in my presence.
Because
And
I've
I,
worked on myself.
Right. And I'm not just a big pile of muscle, and I don't even have that much
Right.
muscle. I'm just in decent shape. But I'm not just the grit and the brawn, I think is what somebody said one time. I'm not just that. I'm also the guy that's going to let you have an emotional space and then encourage it and enjoy it because it's okay.
Yeah. Jason, this has been wonderful. People can find you at Tidbits of Audacity. They can find your book online. What is a man? Where else can they find you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, so I have the tidbits of audacity.com. And then of course on the tidbits of audacity is on all of the major social media platforms. So the
Hmm.
Substack and the Facebook and Instagram and even TikTok. And then the book is on Amazon. I also just I know I did a Kindle version too. So I got the paperback and the Kindle version of What is a Man. And I'll give you a quick thing about it. Well, and lastly, audiobook. This was the big one for the guys in my life. They all looked at me and said, Granger, I'm not buying your book if I've got to sit down and hold that thing. I ain't got time for that. I got to get to work. And I went, got it. They go, if you do an
Listen to it in the
audiobook,
car.
they go, if you do audiobook, I'll do it. And I went, done. So the audiobook's available on all your audio formats, so your Spotify's and Apple Podcasts and all those.
Great.
Uh, but the book about what is a man, and it was like what you and I had talked about was, and there is a piece of it. So I do come from a religious background, so there's a large bit of this that covers sort of what God says a man is, right? And then,
Right.
but then I say, I actually talked about. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Steve Stewart Williams, who does a lot of work on nature versus nurture. He's more into science, but he does a lot of nature nurture. Well, he's writing a lot about nature, nurture, and where that fits with men. And he's
Yeah.
really saying things that kind of go against, but like what we're talking about. It's like we have to have more of these conversations. He's doing this as well. And I told him that that he influenced a lot of what I was writing in this book. He's a Substacker, and he said, "Well, then I want to read it." I said, "Got it." And from about chapter 7 on, it gets a lot more science oriented. It gets a lot more sociological oriented. It gets a lot more cultural oriented from about that point on. So there's something for everybody. If you're not religiously inclined, that's fine. Somewhere, like I said, around chapter 5, 6, 7, somewhere in right in there, it begins to shift into more of a cultural and scientific feel about what it is to be a man.
Oh, and and I think what you're acknowledging, and I think what anybody needs to acknowledge is there are people who are going to want the religious aspects of it because their faith is very important to them. And there are secular people who are, men who are going to say, no, I get all that. I'm aware of it, but, I'm looking for something that's just more everyday, outside of a religion. And that's why this conversation needs to continue is
Yep.
everybody's different. Everybody's coming from things at different perspectives. The most important thing is that they're hearing positive voices about men, leading them to a place where they can be more genuine, they can live from their truest self, and they can uphold themselves to standards that we can all agree on are just good human
Yep. Sure.
standards. Yep.
Yep. Absolutely.
Sir, thank you for your time. Let's
Thank you so
keep
much
this
for having me,
dialogue
man.
open. I
Yeah.
want to keep, I want to keep going and finding differences and commonalities because anybody who can see two men who are relatively different, finding that common ground, I think is, the greatest way that we can overcome this perennial masculinity crisis that America faces. I mean, I'm done with it. I've, 61 years. I've seen, oh my God, men are having problems. Oh my God, women need
Yeah.
to fight back. Oh my God, men are having problems. I'm
Yeah.
done with that.
Yep.
Everybody
Yep.
can be happy.
I'm
It's not a zero
I'm
sum
with
game.
you. That's
Yep.
absolutely correct. I'm with you
Take
on
good
board for
care of
that all
yourself.
the way.
Take care of those children. I
Yes,
only
all
had
of them.
one girl, so I kind of miss the fact that you got more than I did.
They're a lot of fun. It's funny.
Yeah.
I never grew up around girls. I grew up around all boys. When I had the first girl, I was like, I literally ran and bought a book. I had 3 questions. My 3 questions about raising girls was, do they really cry about everything? What do they eat? I don't know. I've never been around a girl. And what is my prison cell going to look like when she's 16? That's all I wanted to know.
I'll
So
tell you,
they're a lot of
that
fun.
that
They're a lot
covers a
of fun.
lot of ground.
Right, right,
Jason,
right.
thank you again for your time, sir.
Thank you for so much for having me. I
Yep.
mean that genuinely. Thank you, sir.